Welcome back to The Making of a Man. If you've been walking with us through this journey, through the Battle Plan series, through the conversations on identity, marriage, forgiveness, and spiritual warfare, I just want to say, I'm glad you're here. These aren't surface level conversations. We're stepping into the real battles, the real pressures, and the real calling of what it means to live as a man of God. And if this is your first time listening, I want to welcome you as well. This podcast is about growth. It's about healing. It's about becoming the man God created you to be. Not perfectly, but intentionally. Because the truth is, a man of God is a man at war, not against people, but in the unseen battles that shape his mind, his heart, his relationships, and his purpose. And today's episode, this one is personal. This isn't just teaching. This isn't just principles. This is something I walked through recently in real time. A moment where everything I talk about on this podcast, faith, trust, surrender, wasn't theoretical anymore. It was tested. Because just over 8 weeks ago, I found myself facing something that had the potential to change everything. And what I learned in that moment is that there's a difference between talking about faith and needing it to carry you. Like I said, just about 2 months ago, I sat in a doctor's office and heard words that stop you in your tracks. Not hypothetical words, not just in case language, real words, clinical words. Words like nodule, words like malignancy, words like metastasized. And in that moment, everything gets real. The room doesn't change, but it feels like it does. The air gets heavier, your thoughts get louder, and your mind doesn't stay in the moment. It starts racing ahead. You start thinking about your future, your family, your wife, your kids, your calling. Everything that matters most. Suddenly, it feels like it's hanging in the balance. Because this wasn't just a conversation for me. This wasn't just information. This was personal. I've seen what cancer does. I've watched my dad walk through it. I watched him go from strong to suffering, from the man I knew to a shell of who he once was. And I remember thinking back then, I don't ever want to walk that road. And now, here I am. Sitting in that chair, facing the possibility that I might. And I'm telling you, there's a difference between talking about faith and needing it to carry you. It's one thing to say God is in control when life is steady. It's another thing to believe it when everything in front of you feels uncertain. Because in that moment, this wasn't a sermon, this wasn't a conversation, this was a battle. A battle in my mind, a battle in my heart, a battle between fear and trust. And today, I want to take you into that battle. And if I'm being honest, this battle didn't start in that doctor's office. It started weeks earlier, quietly, subtly, in ways I could have easily ignored. Because a few weeks before that moment, I came down with what I thought was just bronchitis. Nothing major, just a cough, lingering longer than usual. I wasn't overly concerned. I wasn't paying close attention. In fact, if anything, I was doing the opposite. I was inactive, eating poorly, not really taking care of myself the way I should have been. But then something happened that caught my attention. When I went in to get it checked out, the doctor noticed I'd lost about 20 pounds in just a few weeks. And here's the thing, I hadn't been trying to lose weight. I wasn't dieting, I wasn't working out. There was no explanation for it. And that's when the tone of the conversation started to shift. The questions got more specific, more intentional, more serious. We started talking about the cough that hadn't gone away, the night sweats, the things I had brushed off, the things I hadn't really given much thought to. And in that moment, what felt small started to feel significant. So the doctor ordered a CAT scan, and that's where everything changed. As I mentioned, the doctor ordered a CAT scan, and at that point, I still wasn't thinking worst case scenario. I wasn't panicking. I just thought, let's check it out, get some answers, and move on. But when the results came back, that's when everything shifted. The report said there was a multilobulated nodule in my right lung, and then came the words that hit different. Words you don't just read and move past. words that carry the weight the moment you see them. Malignancy, metastasized. And just like that, this wasn't routine anymore. Sometimes the battle doesn't announce itself. It shows up in a doctor's report. No warning, no build-up, just a moment where everything changes. Because in that instant, you're no longer dealing with symptoms. You're facing possibility. And those possibilities, they start to press in on you. An appointment was made with a pulmonologist, and he reviewed the scan and then noticed something else, a swollen lymph node near my throat. That led to a bronchoscope, a biopsy, and during that procedure, they found 2 more swollen lymph nodes. So now it's not just one area, now it's multiple points of concern. And from there, more tests were ordered, a PET scan, specialized blood work, all to determine one thing: is this cancer? And then came the waiting. Days where you don't have answers, but your mind keeps trying to create them. Days where nothing has been confirmed, but everything feels possible. And that's where the real battle begins. Because here's the truth. Uncertainty is the breeding ground for fear. And for me, this wasn't just medical. This wasn't just clinical. This was deeply personal. Because I've seen this before. I've lived this before. And the moment those words showed up on that report, my mind didn't stay in the present. It went straight to my past. Because here's what happened next. The moment those words showed up on that report, malignancy, metastasized, my mind didn't stay in that doctor's office. It went somewhere else. It went back to a place I know all too well. Back to watching my dad. I didn't just think about cancer. I've seen what it does. I watched it slowly take everything from him. I watched a strong man, a capable man, a man who valued providing, leading, taking care of himself and his family. I watched that get stripped away, piece by piece. He fought. He really did. He tried so hard to not let it defeat him, but it was too much. He lost the ability to take care of himself. He ended up with a feeding tube, a tracheotomy. The man who once carried responsibility now depended on others for everything. My mom, my brother, me. And I remember watching that and wondering, what hurt him more? The physical pain of what he was going through, or the loss of everything that made him feel like the man he'd always been? Because for a man that matters. Strength, independence, dignity, the ability to lead, to provide, to stand on your own. And I watched all that fade for him. And then it got to the point where he was lying in a coma for days. And I remember those nights like they were yesterday, lying in bed, listening to him breathe. And every breath felt like it might be his last. There were moments where he would stop breathing for several seconds at a time. And in those moments, everything inside of me just paused. I'm waiting, hoping, bracing, and then another breath comes. And you don't know if you're relieved or just preparing for the next time it stops. And that went on for days until it didn't. And I stood there watching the end of a man I loved, a man I respected. And that moment, that experience, it leaves something in you. It doesn't just stay in your memory. It imprints on you. It shapes how you see things, how you respond, what you fear. So when I sat in that doctor's office and those words came across that report, I wasn't just hearing information. I was reliving a story. And this time, I wasn't the one watching it happen to someone else. I was the one in it. And that's when the fear hit differently. Not just fear of the unknown, but fear of what I had already seen. Fear of walking that same road. Fear of losing the ability to be the man I'm called to be, a husband, a father, a leader. Fear of becoming what I had once stood beside, watching it unfold. And here's the truth. Fear doesn't just come from the present. It pulls from your past. It takes what you've seen, what you've lived, what you've lost, and it projects it forward, like it's already written in your future. And in that moment, that's exactly what it was trying to do. It was trying to convince me, this is how your story ends too. And that's where the battle really began. In that moment, you have to recognize something. The battle isn't just around you, it's in you. Because nothing had been confirmed yet, there was no diagnosis, no final answer. But internally, it already felt like the verdict had been handed down. And that's how the mind works under pressure. It doesn't wait for truth. It starts filling in the gaps. It starts connecting dots that aren't fully there. Building worst-case scenarios, replaying images, projecting outcomes. And before you even realize it, you're no longer responding to reality. You're reacting to what might be true. That's where fear gains ground. Not always in what it is, but in what could it be. And for me, those thoughts weren't quiet. They were loud, persistent, relentless. Because when your past is feeding your present, and your present is uncertain, your mind becomes a battlefield. And whether you realize it or not, that's where the real fight is won or lost. So let's talk about that battle. So now I'm in that space, waiting on results, living in the unknown, and this is where the real battle showed up. Not in my body, not in the scans, but in my mind. Because when uncertainty meets fear, your thoughts don't stay still. They start racing, and mine did. I started thinking about my family, my wife. I started thinking about my daughter in a relationship that hasn't been fully repaired yet. And suddenly that weight got heavier because now it's not just about me. It's about what's unfinished. I started thinking about the things I haven't accomplished yet. The goals still sitting out there. The responsibilities I carry. Providing, protecting, leading my home the way I'm called to. And all of a sudden it feels like all of that is at risk. And then the worst case scenarios start creeping in. You've seen this before. This is how it goes. It's going to happen again. And not just again. Maybe worse. Because now it's personal. Now it's you. And that internal dialogue, it wasn't encouraging. There wasn't much truth in it. There wasn't much hope in it. It was dominated by what ifs and maybes. What if it is cancer? What if it has already spread? What if I walk the same road my dad did? What if I don't make it through this? And the more those thoughts repeat, the louder they get, until eventually they don't feel like possibilities anymore. They feel like truth, and that's how strongholds are formed. Every stronghold starts with a lie, but it feels like truth once you've lived through it long enough. And I could feel that happening in real time, because here's the tension I was living in. There were the medical facts, and then there were the emotional assumptions. The facts said, there's a nodule, we need more testing, we don't have a diagnosis yet. But my mind was saying, this is cancer, this is the beginning of the end. You already know how this story goes. And those two things, they weren't the same. But in the middle of fear, they felt the same. Because when your imagination takes over, it doesn't wait for evidence. It builds a reality that hasn't happened yet and then pulls you into it. And before long, you're not living in what is, you're living in what you fear could be. And that's where I found myself, caught between reality and imagination. Between truth and the lies trying to sound like it. And in that space, God's voice can start to feel distant. Not because he's not speaking, but because everything else has gotten louder. And that's when you realize this isn't just a situation you're walking through. This is a battle for what you're going to believe. And that's the tension, because in the middle of all that noise, the fear, the what ifs, the worst case scenarios, you're left with a question. What am I going to listen to? Because something is going to shape your perspective. Something is going to influence what you believe. And in that moment, it's easy to let fear take the lead. It's easy to let your past write your future. It's easy to let your thoughts run unchecked. But this is where everything begins to shift. Not when the situation changes, but when your focus does. Because even in the middle of that battle, even with everything going on internally, God was still speaking. And what I realized is this: His voice doesn't compete for attention, but it will meet you in surrender, and that's where the story takes a turn. And this is where it got real, in a different way. Because in the middle of all that noise, the fear, the racing thoughts, the worst case scenarios, I sensed something from God. And I want to be very clear about how I say this, because this matters. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some overwhelming moment of certainty where everything suddenly made sense. It was quiet, weighty, and if I'm being honest, it was unsettling. Because what I felt was this: you have cancer, and this is the path we're going to walk. And when that hit me, it didn't bring clarity. It brought a decision, because I had to wrestle with it. Was this fear? Was this my past speaking? Was this my mind trying to fill in the gaps? Or was it God asking something deeper of me? And the more I sat with it, the more I realized I didn't hear it as a sentence. I heard it as a calling. Not a declaration of how things would end, but an invitation on how I would walk through it. It wasn't fear-driven. It was purpose-driven. It wasn't about the outcome. It was about the surrender. Because the question underneath it all was this: will you trust me, even here? Not when things are clear, not when the outcome is favorable, but right here, in the unknown. And that's where faith gets real. Because faith isn't always God telling you the outcome. Sometimes it's Him asking if you'll trust Him without one. And I had to come to terms with that. I had to face the possibility that this could be cancer, and that this could be a difficult road, that this could change everything, and still choose to trust Him. Not because I understood it, not because I was comfortable with it, but because I believe who He is. And in that moment, something began to shift. Not in my circumstances, those hadn't changed yet, but in my posture. I moved from trying to control the outcome to surrendering it. From needing answers to choosing trust. And that didn't make the fear disappear overnight, but it gave me something stronger to stand on. And even in that place of surrender, even after choosing to trust God with the outcome, I wasn't meant to carry the weight by myself. Because here's something I've learned. God will meet you personally in the battle, but He will also surround you relationally in it. And that matters more than we realize. Because when fear is loud, when your mind is racing, when the unknown feels overwhelming, isolation will only amplify it. It will make everything feel heavier, everything feel darker, everything feel more final than it actually is. But God doesn't design us to fight that way. He doesn't send men into battle alone. He builds brotherhood. He gives us people. He places others around us to stand in the gap when we're weak. And that's exactly what began to happen. Because while I was walking through this internally, God was moving externally through the people He had already placed in my life. My wife, my friends, our couples group. They stepped in. They showed up. They prayed. And what I started to realize is this: sometimes the strength you need doesn't come from within you. It comes from the people standing with you. And that's where the story takes another turn. This is where I started to see something powerful unfold. Because while I was walking through this battle internally, the fear, the uncertainty, the surrender, God was already moving externally through people. My wife stepped in a way that only she can. She was praying for me, covering me, standing with me when I didn't always feel strong. And then others stepped in too. Friends, our couples group. And this wasn't surface level support. This wasn't just, hey, we're thinking about you. This was intentional, focused, spiritual. The Sunday before I was supposed to get the results, our couples group gathered around me. They laid hands on me. They prayed over me. And in that moment, it wasn't just a gesture. It was alignment with something God has already put in place. Scripture says in Ecclesiastes 4:12, Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. That's not just poetic language. That's a picture of spiritual strength. Because when it's just you, the weight can feel overwhelming. But when you bring others in, when you invite God into the center of it, something shifts. Strength increases. Clarity begins to rise. Peace starts to settle in. And then there's what we see in James 5:14 through 15. Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. That's exactly what was happening. This wasn't random. This wasn't emotional. This was obedience. People stepping in and doing what Scripture calls us to do. Standing in faith, interceding, believing God for healing. And I could feel it, not just physically, but spiritually. Because when people come alongside you like that, it reminds you of something you can forget in the middle of fear. You are not alone. And here's the truth. Isolation magnifies fear. Brotherhood and prayer confront it. Because when you're by yourself, your thoughts can run unchecked. Your fears can grow unchallenged. But when you bring others in, when people are speaking truth, praying over you, standing with you, it disrupts that cycle. It brings light into the dark places. It brings truth into confusion. It brings strength when you feel weak. And in that moment, I wasn't just relying on my own faith anymore. I had people carrying it with me, and that made all the difference. And there's something that happens when you're being covered like that. When people are praying, when truth is being spoken over you, when you're not carrying the weight alone anymore, it creates space. Space for something deeper to take place. Because up to that point, I had been processing, wrestling, trying to understand. But now it wasn't about understanding anymore. It was about surrender. Because there comes a moment in every battle where you realize you can't control the outcome. You can't force the answer. You can't think your way into peace. And all that's left is what you're going to do with it. Are you going to keep holding on? Or are you going to trust God with it? And for me, that moment came. And this is where everything shifted for me. Not externally. Nothing had changed yet. The tests were still out there. The results were still unknown. The questions were still unanswered. But internally, something had to give. Because I reached the end of what I could control. I couldn't speed up the results. I couldn't change what the scans would show. I couldn't think my way into peace. And that's when it became clear. This wasn't a moment for control. This was a moment for surrender. And I had to make the decision. Am I going to keep trying to hold this together in my own strength? Or am I going to trust God with it? Not just with the outcome, but with the process, with the waiting, with the uncertainty, with the possibility of what this could be. And that's not an easy place to get to, because surrender sounds good in theory until it requires you to let go of something that matters deeply to you. Your health, your future, your family, your calling. But in that moment, I knew I had to release it. Not because I felt strong, but because I knew I wasn't. And that's when this truth settled in my heart. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Psalm 23:4. Notice what that says. It doesn't say if you walk through the valley. It says even though you do. It doesn't say you'll avoid it. It doesn't say you'll go around it. It says you'll walk through it. And that's what this felt like. Like I was standing on the edge of a valley, and I didn't know how deep it went or how long it would last. But the promise wasn't that I'd be spared from it. The promise was that I wouldn't walk it alone, for you are with me. And that's what I held on to. Not an outcome, not a guarantee of how things would turn out, but His presence. And in that moment, I made the decision, God, whatever this is, whatever this becomes, I trust you. And that's what I held on to, not an outcome, but His presence. And then this truth anchored me even deeper. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Isaiah 41:10. This wasn't just a verse. That was a promise I had to stand on. Not that I'd avoid the valley, but that I wouldn't walk it alone. Not that I'd have control, but that I'd have strength. If this is a battle I have to walk through, you'll walk it with me. If this is a path that changes everything, you're in control. And if this is something you're going to use, God, then I'm willing to follow you through it. That was the moment. Not where the fear disappeared completely, but where trust took its place at the center. And once that happened, I was ready to face whatever came next. And once you reach that place of surrender, something shifts in how you walk forward. Not because you suddenly have answers, but because you've settled who you're trusting in the absence of them. And that's what carried me into the next moment, the moment where everything would be revealed, the appointment, the conversation, the report that would finally answer the question that had been hanging over everything. What is this? And I remember walking into that appointment, not knowing what I was about to hear, but knowing I had already made a decision about how I would face it. And that's where this story reaches its turning point. This was the day, the appointment where everything would finally be answered. And I'll be honest with you, the tension was high. Even after everything, the prayers, the surrender, the decision to trust God no matter what, I was still scared. Because faith doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means you keep moving forward, even when it's there. My wife was right there with me, by my side, like she had been through this entire process. And you could feel it between us, the weight, the anticipation, both of us carrying that same question, but neither of us saying it out loud. What are we about to hear? We walked into that appointment together, sat down, waited. And if you've ever been in a moment like that, you know the waiting feels different. Time slows down. Your thoughts get louder. Your heart starts beating a little faster. And you're trying to stay steady. But everything in you knows this moment matters. Because up until now, everything has been a possibility, but now it's about to become a reality. The doctor walked in, and in a moment like that, you're reading everything. His expression, his tone, the way he sits down, because you're trying to get a sense before the words even come out. And then he looks at me, and he said, "The nodule is gone." Let that sit for a second, because in a moment where you're bracing for one reality, you hear something completely different. The nodule is gone. And then he continued explaining what they had found. The blood work had come back clean, no indicators of cancer. The PET scans showed no hot spots, nothing lighting up that would suggest cancer anywhere. And those lymph nodes, the one that had been swollen, the ones that raised even more concern, they had shrunk. Everything they had been looking for wasn't there. And then he said it again. These things don't just disappear. And he's right. They don't. And in that moment, sitting there, hearing those words, there's a pause. Because your mind is trying to catch up with what your ears just heard. You came in bracing for one outcome, and now you're handed something completely different. Relief starts to rise, but so does something else, awe. Because this isn't just good news. This is something you can't fully explain. The scan said one thing, the concern was real, the process was thorough, and yet the outcome didn't match the expectation. And in that space, you're left with a question, what do I do with this? Because moments like this, they demand more than just relief. They call for recognition, not just of what happened, but of who was behind it. And that's where the truth becomes clear. And in that moment, everything became clear. Not just what had happened, but who was behind it. Because you can walk through the process, you can look at the reports, you can hear the doctor say, these things don't just disappear, and still try to explain it away. But at some point, you have to acknowledge what's right in front of you. There was a nodule. There were concerning indicators. There were swollen lymph nodes. There were real questions about cancer. And now, there was no trace of cancer. The blood work was clean. The PET scan showed nothing. The lymph nodes had shrunk. No medical explanation. No logical progression. Just gone. And here's the truth. God can remove what man cannot explain. And I believe with everything in me, that's exactly what he did. What medicine couldn't explain, God had already handled. And I'm not saying that lightly. I'm not just saying that emotionally. I'm saying that with clarity because I walked through the process. I saw the concern. I felt the weight of it. And I also saw the outcome. But I want to be very clear about something because, again, this matters. God is faithful whether he heals or whether he sustains you through it. He is no less good, no less present, no less powerful if the outcome looks different than what we hope for. Because our faith is not built on outcomes. It's built on who he is. And there are people walking through battles right now, praying, believing, trusting, and their story may look different than mine. But God is no less faithful in their story. He is just as present in the sustaining as he is in the healing. But in this moment, in this story, he chose to heal. And I can't walk away from that without acknowledging it, without giving him credit for it, without saying clearly, this wasn't coincidence, this wasn't luck, this was God. And when you experience something like that, it doesn't just change your situation, it deepens your faith. It reinforces what you believe, and it reminds you he is still at work. And when you walk through something like that, you just don't move on. You don't just go back to normal like nothing happened. Because moments like this, they leave a mark, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally. They shift something inside of you, the way you think, the way you see things, the way you trust God. But this wasn't just about a diagnosis that didn't happen. This was about everything that happened in me while I walked through it. The fear, the battle in my mind, the surrender, the prayers, the support. The moment God met me in it. And when you step back and look at all of that, you realize there are lessons here. There are truths that go deeper than the outcome. Things God was showing me, shaping in me, refining through me. And I don't want to miss that. Because this wasn't just something I went through. It's something that I'm meant to carry forward. So let me share with you what this has taught me. When I step back and look at everything, not just the outcome, but the process, here's what I now know that I didn't fully understand before. And this is where it becomes bigger than my story. Because these aren't just lessons for me. These are truths you can carry into whatever battle you're facing. And here's 5 things that this taught me. First, fear will always speak first, but it doesn't get the final word. Fear showed up immediately. It didn't wait. It didn't hesitate. It spoke through the report, through my thoughts, through my past. And if I'm being honest, it was loud. But just because fear speaks first doesn't mean it gets to decide what's true. You have a choice in what voice you agree with. And I had to learn how to let fear speak without letting it lead. Second, your past will try to define your future, but God rewrites stories. What I saw my dad go through tried to become the lens I saw my future through. It felt familiar. It felt predictable, like the story had already been written. But God doesn't operate inside the limitations of your past. He's not bound by what you've seen, what you've experienced, or what you expect. He writes new stories. And this reminded me, just because something happened before doesn't mean it's how your story ends. Third, you don't need certainty to trust God. I wanted answers, clarity, some kind of guarantee. But that's not what I was given. What I was given was an opportunity to trust him without knowing the outcome. And that's what real faith looks like. Not trusting God because you know how it's going to turn out, but trusting him when you don't, when everything is uncertain, but you choose to believe in who he is anyway. Fourth, You were never meant to walk battles alone. One of the most powerful parts of this experience was realizing how much I needed other people. My wife, my friends, our couples group, the prayers, the support, the people standing with me. That wasn't extra. It was essential. Because isolation feeds fear, but community strengthens faith. And some of you right now, you're trying to fight battles by yourself. And that's not how God designed you to live. You need people. You need support. You need others standing with you. Fifth and finally, God is still a healer. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. I walked into that process facing a possible physical diagnosis, and I walked out of it healed. But here's what I also know. God wasn't just working in my body. He was working in my mind, in my heart, in my faith. He was healing fear, reframing my past, strengthening my trust in Him, because His healing isn't limited to just one area. He heals completely. And sometimes the greatest healing isn't just what He removes. It's what He restores in you through the process. And this reminded me of something I'll never forget. He is still at work, still moving, still healing, still faithful. And that's the point where this can't just stay my story, because it's one thing to hear what God did in someone else's life. It's another thing to ask what it means for yours. Because you don't walk through something like this just to tell it. You walk through it to carry something out of it. And I believe this with everything in me. If God allowed me to walk through that battle, then there's something in it for you too. Not the same situation, not the same details, but the same truth. Because the battle may look different, but the principles don't change. Fear still speaks, the mind is still a battlefield, but trust is still required. And every man listening right now, you're facing something. Maybe not a diagnosis, but something that's testing you, something that's pressing on you, something that's forcing you to decide, what am I going to believe? So let's bring this directly to you. Because this isn't just my story. This is about where you are right now. Maybe you're not sitting in a doctor's office, but you're facing something uncertain, something heavy, something that's been weighing on your mind, keeping you up at night, running through your thoughts when things get quiet. And if you're honest, fear has had a voice in it. Maybe it's not loud all the time, but it's there, whispering worst-case scenarios, reminding you of your past, trying to convince you that this is how it's going to play out. So here's the question. What report are you believing? The one your fear is writing, or the truth of who God is? Because some of you are living in the tension right now. You don't have answers. You don't know how it's going to turn out. And you're trying to hold it together, trying to control what you can, trying to think your way through it. But let me tell you something clearly. You don't win that battle by controlling the outcome. You win by choosing who you trust in the middle of it. So let me ask you directly, where is fear speaking in your life right now? Where is your past trying to define your future? What situation are you facing that feels uncertain, that feels heavy, feels like it could change everything? And here's the hard question. Have you surrendered it? Not just said you trust God, but actually release control of it. Because that's where the shift happens. Not when the situation changes, but when your posture does. Some of you are carrying things right now that you were never meant to carry alone. You've kept it to yourself. You haven't brought it to anyone. And it's weighing you down more than it should. It's time to bring people in. It's time to stop isolating and start inviting others to stand with you. And above everything else, it's time to decide what you're going to believe. Not what fear is telling you, not what your past is trying to replay, but the truth that God is with you, that He is faithful, that He is still working, and even when you can't see it yet, and whether He heals or whether He walks you through it, He will not leave you in it alone. So whatever you're facing right now, don't let fear write the ending. Trust God with it, even here. Men, hear me clearly. Faith isn't proven when things are easy. It's not proven when everything makes sense, when the path is clear, when the outcome looks favorable. Faith is forged when everything in front of you says fear, and you choose to trust anyway. When the report doesn't look good, but you refuse to let it define the final word. When your past is trying to replay itself, but you stand on the truth that God writes new stories. When your mind is racing, but you take those thoughts captive and choose what is true. When you don't have answers, but you decide you don't need them to trust God. That's where faith is built. That's where men are formed, not in comfort, but in the tension between fear and trust. And some of you are in that tension right now. You're facing something that feels uncertain, something that feels heavy, something that's pressing you to the edge. And this is your moment, not to run, not to control, but to trust, to surrender what you can't control and stand firm in who God is. Because that's what a man of God does. He doesn't wait for fear to disappear. He leads in the middle of it. He doesn't need perfect clarity. He moves forward with conviction. He doesn't isolate. He brings others into the battle. And he doesn't build his faith on outcomes. He builds it on the unchanging character of God. So whatever you're facing this week, don't let fear take ground. Don't let your past write your future. Don't let uncertainty shake what you know to be true. Stand firm, trust God, and walk forward, even if it's one step at a time. Because a man of God is a man at war, but he is never without a commander, never without a calling, and never without the victory Christ has already secured. You are not fighting for victory, you are standing from it. So stay alert, stand firm, lead with courage, and protect what matters most. Walk not in your own strength, but in the strength that only Jesus provides. Until next time, keep training, keep growing, and keep becoming the man God created you to be. This is our battle plan. This is our calling. This is the making of a man.